Hey, it's Nancy. Before we begin today, I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Crime Beat early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Thursday, February 12th, 1976, was a typically snowy and cold winter day in Calgary. The weekend seemed far away, and two best friends, Eva Dvorak and Patsy McQueen, were feeling the doldrums. The 14-year-olds skipped class, hid out in the girls' washroom, and cracked open a bottle of alcohol.
The principal had caught them. She phoned the parents to come and pick up the girls because they were getting expelled and going home. They knew that they were going to be punished.
Yeah, we'd get grounded for like a month. And Patsy and Eva went out the back door and left the school before Mom and Dad got there.
Upset at the girls' behavior, their families went back home and waited for them to show up later that night. But they would never see Eva and Patsy alive again.
I just remember a lot of screaming. Terrible screaming.
I'm Nancy Hixt, a senior crime reporter for Global News. Today, on Crime Beat, I share a shocking discovery and how a lack of answers stalled the investigation for decades. This is Uncovering a Serial Killer. This case unfolded before I was even born. As you might imagine, there have been challenges in finding all the details I need to share this story almost 50 years later. Several times I've started to write, but just when I felt I had everything I needed, new information would come to light and I would need to explore a whole new avenue. And again, triple-check facts to give you a full picture of this case. It's taken me over a year to put this special series together, and I can tell you there have been some jaw-dropping moments along the way, including unexpected conversations that quite literally gave me chills as people shared their connections to this shocking story. For cases like this, I always start deep in the basement of Global Calgary, where our news archives are housed. After spending days sifting through hundreds of dusty boxes of tapes, I still couldn't find what I was looking for and learned that at some point, a lot of the older footage was sent to a museum. So I checked with the museum to see if they had what I was looking for, but learned the museum had sent the tapes to the University of Calgary. After explaining the situation, my photographer and I were granted special access to the university archives, where we sorted through hundreds of files and boxes of film, which all had to happen in an extremely secure and sterile environment, as over time, film degrades and starts to break down. The archivists treat these old files with the utmost respect. We were given gloves and put in a room where no food, no drinks, no pens were allowed, just a piece of paper and a pencil to jot down box numbers I wanted to flag. After what seemed like endless hours and deep paper cuts, unfortunately, we learned the archives we were looking for no longer exist. Somewhere, in all the moves from location to location, they had been lost. That means, for a lot of the background to this story, I had to depend on Eva and Patsy's families. They were extremely patient and kind, and as you'll hear, they have a clear recollection of what took place. 4 of Patsy's 10 siblings provided a detailed narrative of what happened in 1976. They said that 14-year-olds Patsy and Eva were inseparable. Eva was outgoing. She loved to go swimming, roller skating, or ice skating. She also loved to dance and sing, a passion she shared with her best friend.
My brother Ermin and I recorded her on a tape recorder. I wish I had that tape recording now of Puppy Love, because she would sing her heart out, and she wanted to be a singer, a big star. And so we were going to tape her and send this tape off to whoever we could.
That's Patsy's sister, Dee Hagen. She says Patsy was quick-witted and loved to tell jokes or pull a prank. Anything for a laugh. With their shared appetite for adventure, it came as no surprise that Eva and Patsy got into a bit of mischief at school.
She was always wanting to navigate and explore different things. And yeah, she was a typical teenager too. Did typical things teenagers do, get into a little bit of trouble. We all did. I did. I can't even, my parents would kill me if they knew what I did at her age. So it was nothing new. Like, they weren't bad girls. They were good girls.
But the day they cut class to drink in the girls' washroom, they both knew they would face serious consequences. They would be expelled from school, and at home, they would be grounded. So, to avoid their punishment, they took off. Patsy's family figured the girls would show up later that night, or reach out to one of the older siblings, including her twin sisters Lorraine Kane and Laura Jacobson.
The first call I got was from my father. And he said to me, and he was checking to see if Patsy had come to my house. I said, no, Dad, she didn't come here. And he said, okay, if you see her, she needs to call her mother immediately.
That's what we were all hoping for, that she would just come to one of our houses and tell us that, I messed up and got kicked out of school, and Mom and Dad's going to be mad, and what should I do, right? But that's what we were hoping that she would do, right? And that didn't happen. The police were alerted.
Patsy's sister, Sandy Ask, was just 10 months younger, and they were only a grade apart.
We were phoning friends to see if we could find her anywhere, but back then everybody was so tight that nobody would tell you anything either, right? Because they didn't want to get the girls in trouble.
Sandy remembers police officers attended the school on Friday, February 13th, the day after her sister and Eva disappeared. As investigators spoke with students, Lorraine said they finally got a lead.
There was a party on a Friday night, and my brothers went there. But by the time my brothers got there, she was no longer there.
It seemed both family and police were always a few steps behind.
I wish back in those days that we had phones like we have today, because then we could have got her, right? But we didn't. And so we didn't know how to find her except for to go out and keep looking for her.
Dee said it was out of character for the girls to take off without contacting family.
Even if we did do something wrong and went and stayed at somebody's place, it would be just for that night.
Saturday came and went, and there was still no word from either Patsy or Eva.
That's why we knew like something terrible was wrong. So panic did set in, and I felt in my heart something terrible happened to her.
Lorraine recalls that police reached out to the two families early the next morning.
We all got called on Sunday morning, and we were all just told to come to my parents' house.
Patsy's uncle was a police officer and showed up at his brother's house to deliver the news. It was so much worse than anyone had anticipated. Lorraine, Dee, Sandy, and Laura all have vivid memories of the moment he told them Eva and Patsy had been found dead that morning west of the city.
My uncle at that time, Uncle Wick, he was actually went to the scene too and realized that it was his niece that was laying there. And so he asked them, I know that it's not protocol, but can I please go tell my brother? and they did let him come.
Just chaos and cries. I've never seen my mom cry like that in my whole life.
And mom and dad just losing it. Everybody screaming, like we couldn't believe that actually happened to her, that she was gone.
Everybody was so upset and not knowing what direction to go. And I do remember that shortly after we all come to the house, that my dad and my two brothers left with my dad to go to identify the body. And it was hard to believe that this was actually happening.
Our parents were never the same after that. They changed completely, totally different people.
Eva and Patsy had been found near an area they'd visited many times with their families. It's a Calgary residential suburb now, but in the 70s, Happy Valley was outside the city limits. It was a popular campground and amusement park, complete with rides and a swimming pool. Eva and Patsy were found a short distance away from the adventure park, at the exit from the Trans-Canada Highway. The Happy Valley underpass was about 23 kilometers from Eva and Patsy's junior high school. How they ended up there and how they died was a mystery. Here's Staff Sergeant Travis McKenzie of the Alberta RCMP Serious Crimes Branch.
This is a well-traveled road even back in 1976, and there was actually a Calgary Police Service officer had actually driven through that area on a completely unrelated call. He was actually looking for deer that were reported to be in the area and on the road. So we know that he drove by this area at 10:15 in the morning, and the girls were found by just another passing motorist at 10:50 in the morning. So it's a very tight timeline from when we know for a fact the girls weren't there and when they actually were found by a motorist. Their bodies were located very close together, almost, when you look at the pictures, almost, cuddled together. They were fully clothed at the time, although some of their clothing did appear to be somewhat disheveled, almost like they'd been placed there.
The girls had been found on the outskirts of Calgary, which meant the RCMP would take charge of the case.
Full-scale investigation was immediately launched into who were these girls, where did they come from, how did they end up here, and of course, how and why did they die? They located a witness who recognized the girls and actually had interactions with them up to the point where they disappeared. They were able to confirm that the girls were in the Inglewood area walking towards the downtown core of Calgary on 9th Avenue and 12th Street Southeast.
That sighting in Inglewood happened about 19 kilometers from where the girls were found and 5 kilometers from their junior high school. The witness reported seeing Eva and Patsy alive at about 12 a.m. February 15th, approximately 10 hours before they were found dead. But investigators were at a loss to determine what happened during those hours, and autopsies failed to give police any further insight.
The medical examiner, he's still alive today, Dr. John Butts, they actually examined them twice and they could not find any type of cause or manner of death. They had some theories. They believed that could it have been a intentional or unintentional drug overdose.
I was able to speak with Dr. Butt, and he says he was not present for the initial autopsies, but conducted a re-examination on February 26, 1976, 9 days after they were found dead.
I remember there was some difficulty establishing the cause of death. We thought originally that it was a toxicologically related death, that is, by some chemical substance that they had perhaps even willingly ingested.
I should note, given nearly 50 years have passed since Dr. Butt worked on this file, he admits his memory has faded. But he was able to provide a general overview of the case. The manner of death was ultimately deemed to be asphyxia, but the cause of death was ruled undetermined.
I can tell you this, that asphyxia, particularly smothering, is a difficult diagnosis to make. And undetermined means that it's not known whether it's a suicide, an accident, or a homicide. And so that's a good category for the deaths.
In 1976, Dr. Butt wrote that the possibilities of homicide in this case included strangulation, smothering, homicidal poisoning, or secondary causes from attempted strangulation. But he went on to add that, quote, the possibilities for a drug-related accident are more likely, end quote. 7 months later, in September of 1976, a coroner's inquest was held. During that provincially regulated process, which took place in Calgary, witnesses testified and details about the case were presented to jurors. The goal was to try to get definitive answers in situations where the cause or responsibility of a deceased person was uncertain. At that time, a jury was unable to determine the cause of death. No recommendations were made. It was frustrating for Eva and Patsy's families, who so desperately wanted answers.
Well, we did have so many questions, but they always gave us so much runaround. Like, maybe they were suffocated, maybe they were this, maybe they were that. Nobody could ever give us an answer. There was never a complete answer how the girls died.
Patsy's sister Lorraine said it always felt like the blame was put on the girls, as if their deaths were a result of something they did wrong.
It was painted as these girls were out partying and had drugs in their system. No, you know what? My father never, until he even passed away, he always knew. You could see it in his eyes. He was so heartbroken. And he always said, one day somebody's going to come forward and they're going to tell us what happened. But until then, we have to live with what we've been told.
Patsy's sisters, Sandy, Lorraine, and Dee, said that instead of compassion or sympathy, their families faced disdain and criticism.
Very judgmental, that they deserved what they got and all that kind of talk. Kids are the meanest.
It wasn't just only the community. There was even family members that were blaming our parents.
It's so easy for people to judge until that happens to them. And you can't even explain how you feel or what you're going through. They're 14-year-old children.
And that became their new normal. Life was never the same for Eva Dvorak and Patsy McQueen's families.
Mom and Dad would keep us all close. Like, we were always together. They were more protective of us then, after that happened. But it's like a switch went over them, that they were just sad.
At about the same time, in the spring of 1976, Wanderlust led a young woman west. Melissa Rahoric was always drawn to the splendor of Banff and the Rocky Mountains. So the 20-year-old packed up her life in Ontario and moved to Calgary, which is just over an hour's drive from endless mountain adventures. Here again is Staff Sergeant Travis McKenzie of the Alberta RCMP Serious Crimes Branch.
She was working, she was a housekeeper at a local hotel. She was staying at the YWCA. She was friendly. She had friends. But she loved to travel and she loved to explore things, and she had a fascination with just kind of heading out and just being on her own.
That summer, she settled into a routine of work and play. Her days off were spent in the mountains.
She was absolutely known to be an avid hitchhiker. She was even known that she liked being picked up by truck drivers. She kept a journal of her interactions and her adventures that she was have while she was out hitchhiking.
I should note, although it's pretty rare now and illegal in many jurisdictions, in the 1970s, hitchhiking was a fairly common way for people to get around, especially for those without a vehicle. By September 15th, 1976, the leaves were just beginning to turn, and Melissa was excited to soak in the changing seasons on her days off. That night, she finished up work and headed out.
From what she told her friends at the YWCA was that she was excited to go just adventure west of town. We believe that she actually got on a bus which took her down to the Bowness area, which is on the west side of the city. And we know that because actually a bus driver believed that he sighted her and that he saw her and even spoke with her. And she said exactly that she was going to go hitchhike out of the city and head towards Banff.
That was the last time Melissa Rahoric was seen alive.
It's the following morning. It's September 16th. Two hunters are actually in the area about 22 kilometers west of the city. They're north of Highway 1 by Township Road 252 when they actually discover her body lying in the side of the ditch. The ditch was a little bit higher than most typical gravel roads with a long, steep embankment, but she was lying there by herself with her purse about 30 feet away.
Police said the circumstances were suspicious.
There was signs on this gravel road that Melissa would have put up a struggle. And what I mean by that is they could see footprints in the gravel and in the dirt that looked like two people were fighting, right? So like dragged foot impressions, multiple different directions. This just wasn't a case where one person would have gone out. It truly looks from looking at those crime scene photos that when Melissa got out, she was there and she was fighting. So we're dealing with cuts, bruises, abrasions, and the bruising particularly around her neck.
An autopsy was completed, and the cause of death was deemed to be asphyxia from manual strangulation.
So like when I use the word manual strangulation, we're talking with a person's hands. We're not talking about the use of a ligature or an improvised, but it's just truly a person's hands on a person's neck. At the time, investigators, they knew they were dealing with a homicide, but they weren't able to concretely say for a fact that it was a sexually motivated homicide. Melissa was fully clothed, and there were no obvious or overt signs of being sexually assaulted.
Police said samples were gathered for forensic testing.
So with Melissa, samples taken from her body through swabs were actually sent off to the crime lab where they would be tested and come up to be positive for seminal fluid.
At that time, there was no DNA testing. You'll recall from a story I shared earlier this season, Murder in the Mountains, that DNA technology was in its early stages for police investigations in Canada in 1990. And Melissa's murder took place nearly 15 years before that technology was available.
Through talking to witnesses who had traveled through the area at the time, there were reports that a silver truck had been in the area. So initial investigations certainly did focus on trying to identify whose truck this was and did it have any bearing to Melissa's death whatsoever. So a lot of resources went in to try and identify this. Literally everyone with a silver truck in the city of Calgary was trying to be identified to see if they could figure out whose truck this was.
Despite an exhaustive investigation, no suspects were identified. 5 months passed. Then, on February 26, 1977, police were called to an eerily similar scene. A man out walking his dog came across the body of a young woman. She was lying on the side of a very rough gravel road, fully clothed, but her jacket was on inside out. At the time, the area was very desolate and undeveloped. It didn't see a lot of traffic. It's still a popular dog walking location with a designated off-leash park. The discovery was made just outside of the city limits, so again, the RCMP took over the investigation. Officers immediately noted similarities to the homicide of Melissa Rehoric. Here again is RCMP Staff Sergeant Travis McKenzie.
There's no signs of trying to conceal her body or hide a crime. So very similar to Melissa is that the cause of death was manual strangulation. She had marks and abrasions consistent with being involved in a physical struggle or a fight. It looked like she'd been punched in the mouth. It looked like she had wounds on her fingers, probably of her trying to fight off her attacker. She was fully clothed. There was no obvious signs of sexual assault, meaning there was no wounds or injuries to her body that would suggest that. But there was, once again, the presence of seminal fluid.
The victim was identified as 19-year-old Barbara McLean.
Barbara McLean, a young girl from Nova Scotia, she moves out here in September of 1976, and I can only think that it's just another person just wanting to kind of find themselves, 19 years old, and just wants to try something different and new. She comes out to Calgary. She gets a job working at a local bank downtown. She gets a boyfriend, and she just starts living her life in the city.
Police retraced Barbara's steps to a bar at a popular hotel where she went the night before she was found dead.
She ended up going to the Highlander bar on February 25th, 1977. She was there with her boyfriend and friends, and just hearing the stories and talking, listening to the investigators who talked to the people. It was a good night, but it ended up going downhill a bit. She got into a verbal argument with her boyfriend at the time, which led to her, basically walking out of the cabaret that they were attending that night at the Highlander.
That area has changed a lot over the years. The Highlander Hotel had several restaurants, bars, and banquet spaces, and would host conferences or special events. As a child, I can recall going there many times with my family for Mother's Day brunch. Now, the exact spot where the hotel once sat is a Home Depot, and it borders the bustling Trans-Canada Highway, which at that time was a much quieter thoroughfare. Police said back in 1977, witness accounts varied as to what happened after Barbara got into an argument with her boyfriend at the hotel bar. Some said Barbara walked off. Others thought she got into a cab.
Hundreds of taxi cab drivers were interviewed trying to figure out that did one of them pick up Barbara. In the end, they could never conclusively say that a taxi cab had anything to do with Barbara's death, nor they could even ever actually confirm that she got in a taxi cab. It seemed to be a bit of a dead end for a lead.
What investigators felt certain of was that Barbara McLean's death was linked to Melissa Rehoric's.
Melissa and Barbara had very obvious signs of the manual strangulation, and they also both looked like they had put up a fight, in my opinion, right? So whatever they did or what was happening, their attacker had to use physical force to subdue them. There were so many similarities that it was their investigational theory from the onset that the person responsible for Melissa's death was in fact the same person related to Barbara.
Hundreds of persons of interest were looked at, but no viable suspects were identified. Time passed, seasons changed, months turned into years, and eventually decades passed with no new leads in the case. The murders of Melissa Rehoric and Barbara McLean went cold. Their loved ones had no idea who was responsible, only that they had been murdered. every now and then, their deaths would be brought up in news stories. There was one article from 1989, more than a decade after their murders. It's from the Calgary Herald newspaper, and the headline reads, "Killings continue to haunt parents." But that article didn't only list Melissa and Barbara. It also listed 7 other women who had died from 1976 to 1987 and who had been found dead within a few hours' drive of Calgary, from Banff to Drumheller to Standard, Alberta, where Kelly Cook had been kidnapped back in 1981 and later found dead in an irrigation reservoir in the southeastern corner of Alberta. You'll recall I shared Kelly's story in a 2-part series in Season 1 of Crime Beat and continued that story in another episode in Season 3. Her murder remains unsolved. But there were 2 other victims the Herald named in their article. It listed Eva Dvorak and Patsy McQueen. Their names stood out because this was a list of what the reporter called, quote, unsolved female murders. You'll recall over and over their families were told they likely overdosed. Their deaths were never deemed murders, but rather categorized as undetermined deaths. Even with the dramatic headline alluding to the girls' deaths as a killing, RCMP stood behind their belief that the 2 girls overdosed and quashed any notion that it could be murder. The article reads, quote, Corporal Al Carlisle said that both had taken an inhalant like Pam spray or cooking oil. It went on to say, it's possible they died accidentally while using a noxious substance of some kind. We cannot rule out murder, but it would appear to be accidental deaths. Patsy's sisters, Sandy and Dee, said the article only served to refuel the frustration their families already felt. They were still without any answers 13 years after their deaths, and it didn't seem like the investigation would ever be reopened.
It just seemed like it faded away, that they determined that's what happened to them and that was it.
I thought, as time goes by, evidence gets lost, things get lost, statements get lost. Are we ever going to know what happened to her? I just knew. I knew. All of us knew that somebody did something terrible to these girls.
But as Eva and Patsy's case sat stagnant and marked as undetermined, the investigation into the murders of the other 2 young women continued, albeit at a slow pace. 14 years later, in 2003, historical homicide investigators took a fresh look at Melissa Rahorick and Barbara McLean's case. By then, the cases had been cold for nearly 30 years. Over that period, significant advancements had been made in technology and the ability to test forensic exhibits for DNA. Here again is RCMP Staff Sergeant Travis McKenzie.
Melissa and Barbara were always believed to have been connected. And it was in 2003 that forensic science was able to confirm this. In 2003, the DNA samples that were recovered from Melissa and Barbara were tested, and they were both confirmed to be an exact genetic match to one unknown male offender. So what that tells us is the same person who had left their seminal fluid on Melissa was the same one with Barbara. We were looking for one person.
Science had definitively linked the 2 cases. The problem was that the police had no idea who that person was.
And it makes you start wondering, why don't we? What happened to this person? How has it been decades without this person ending up on our national database for DNA? And it's disheartening, but it keeps the investigators focused and still wanting to drive the file forward. So yes, in 2003, we had confirmed that, Melissa and Barbara their homicides are genetically matched. We have our sample sitting on our national DNA database, just waiting for a hit to come in. But we've got no suspects to go to. We have absolutely no idea who could be responsible for it.
The only thing they knew for sure was that this man had sexually assaulted and killed at least 2 women. And it appeared he had yet to be caught for any crimes that came with a mandatory DNA sample included in sentencing.
We have the DNA sample of our offender, but obviously through our criminal databases, we're not getting a hit, which means in Canada, he's not a convicted offender. Previously, in 2012, we had gone through CODIS, which is a request through Interpol to search all United States databases to try and find if he's a registered offender in the United States. And we didn't have a hit for this person at that time either.
The killer continued to elude investigators. And again, the case went cold.
There were a number of files where DNA existed, but there was no resolution.
We performed what we would call the traditional investigative genetic genealogy work in that case to develop a possible candidate for that DNA.
It's truly significant. I mean, it's at this point that we know that we've identified a serial killer.
That's next time on Crime Beat. Crime Beat is written and produced by me, Nancy Hixt, with producer Dila Velasquez. Audio editing and sound design is by Rob Johnston. Special thanks to photographer-editor Danny Lantella for his work on this episode. Thank you to Jesse Weisner, our Crime Beat production assistant. And thanks to Chris Bassett, the VP of Network Content, Production and Distribution and Editorial Standards for Global News. I would love to have you tell a friend about this podcast. There are 6 seasons of stories you can listen to and share. And please consider rating and reviewing Crime Beat on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can find me on Facebook at Nancy Hixt Crime Beat and on Instagram at nancy.hixt. Thanks again for listening. Please join me next time.